spotlight you and now turn it over to you, Jay.
Great. Thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you for everyone else for joining us. Looks like we have the East Coast and West Coast and across the pond covered, looking at where everyone is from and looking forward to a good discussion at the end of this presentation. So the way that we've geared this is I'll present for maybe about 55, 60 minutes, and then we'll have about 25, 30 minutes for Q&A. So feel free to put in the chat, any questions or comments that you might have. And I think we'll have a good discussion at the end. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, excellent. So, this afternoon, at least on the East Coast, we'll have a nice discussion about this field of knowledge management, which has been around formally as a discipline since about 1980, 81. Actually, I've attended a number of the great workshops on AI that Innovate US has put on, and I actually do work in the AI space, and AI goes back to about 1956. So it's nice to see, how over the past 10 or 12 years, how AI has now had a great resurgence with machine learning and LLMs and Gen AI, and so it's been fascinating to kind of track the emergence again of AI and the resurgence of the field. So knowledge management is an interesting field. A lot of people get confused about the difference between information management and knowledge management. So since Hannah's from New York, or at least living there, I'll tell you kind of a quick story to maybe help distinguish the difference between information and knowledge. So a fellow goes into one of the Chase Bank offices in Manhattan in New York City, and he says to the loan officer, "I want to get a $2,000 loan so I can go to Europe for 2 weeks." And the loan officer said, "Well, what kind of collateral do you have?" And he said, "Well, you see that Rolls Royce out front? That's my car." And he gives him his car keys, and he goes off to Europe. And he comes back 2 weeks later, and he sees the loan officer, and he says, "I'm here to repay what I owe you. How much do I owe you?" And the loan officer says, "Well, it's $2,000 plus $15.46 in interest. And by the way, while you were traveling, we checked into your, history and your background, and we saw that you're a multimillionaire. Why did you need to get a loan for just $2,000? He said, "Where else can you park in New York City for 2 weeks for only $15.46? So if you're from New York, you'll understand that parking is much more than that, especially if you see a Broadway show for about 3 hours. So for me, knowledge is making information actionable. And, some people say information would be like knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but knowledge would be knowing that you generally wouldn't put a tomato in a fruit salad, So there is a distinction between data and information and knowledge and wisdom and expertise. We won't get into the epistemology of all that, but hopefully you'll have enough applied knowledge through the presentation to get you to implement some of these ideas in your organization. So I was traveling to New York City, and I passed through Livingston, New Jersey, right outside of New York. And someone had this sign in the front yard, and it says, "I just wanted a sign." And so some organizations just need also a sign to embark on their knowledge management journey. And that sign might be that, there are some aging demographics, maybe in the organization, maybe some critical knowledge might be at loss if people, retire or move on to other projects, or maybe you need a way to further stimulate innovation through the exchange and sharing of new ideas across disciplines. So, it depends on your organization. I did have an opportunity last month to attend a webinar by APQC. APQC is based in Houston, the American Productivity Quality Center, and they've done a lot of knowledge management benchmarking studies. So when we talk about knowledge management, it's really how do you best leverage knowledge internally and externally, to the organization. And so they reached out to quite a few of their clients, and they asked them, why are you engaged in knowledge management? And you can see the main reasons that were cited. So either, employees were kind of frustrated with not being able to find things, related to information that they need, or maybe there were some key retirements of individuals that their knowledge wasn't somehow documented and then shared and leveraged in the organization. We see at the third spot how newer technologies like Gen AI, are playing a role even in the knowledge management space in terms of creating knowledge content, and some of the other issues relating to knowledge gaps in the organization where certain departments may not be getting appropriate flows of knowledge that would help them in their decision making. And then certainly the issue of reskilling and upskilling employees. They also asked this past year, so they had about 226 different responses, and they asked them what are the top priorities, now for your knowledge management teams, and you see the different the bars that relate to previous studies that they conducted using the same set of questions. And certainly the number one indicator for KM, at least from their research, is the need to really map and prioritize and capture critical knowledge and to share that. And you do see kind of the new response about bringing in AI. So it's so timely that Innovate US has been having a number of AI webinars, to introduce you to what could be done from that perspective. So in my research, typically there are 5 main reasons why organizations engage in knowledge management. And it may not be necessarily in this order, but the first one truly is, and that's to increase innovation. So to create new ways of doing things, maybe new products or services through the exchange and transfer and the possibility of generating new knowledge, in particular areas. The other areas deal with certainly building the institutional memory of the organization, as we've talked about before. Different individuals leave for whatever reason. And then the other reasons typically deal with adaptability and flexibility, particularly, as we've had a pivot over the recent years. And then also organizational internal effectiveness and organizational external effectiveness. So just so I don't forget, since I'm a professor, I'll give you some sources that might be useful, various resources. So APQC is having their annual conference coming up the end of April, the beginning of May. And typically they get many practitioners from across government and industry. Not so many university folks, but maybe that's better. So we don't muddy the waters. But there is also the Knowledge Summit which brings in some interesting perspectives from government and industry universities. And this is going to be held at the Trinity College in Dublin on their campus in June. And their focus is also looking at Gen AI and the intersection between AI and human intelligence and knowledge management. And then closer to home, I'm actually a Washingtonian, but every year there's been the KM World Conference, and this year it's mid-November. Actually, on my wife's and my birthday, we have the same birthday on November 18th. And you get quite a few government folks there, as well as industry and some university folks, but it's mainly geared for the government and for industry. So just to finish off another resource or two, there has been over the past quite a few years what's called the Federal Knowledge Management Community. Started many years ago. It's kind of gone in and out of maturity. But anyway, NASA, who's been very active in knowledge management through their Apple stands for the Academy for Program and Project Engineering Leadership. So they had taken the lead, and typically there have been over 300 people from across government, mostly federal government. I know many of you are from state and local governments, but that might be an interesting resource for you. And more from the academic side, there still is quite a bit of interest in knowledge management. I also do work in analytics and AI. I've been in the AI space since 1980, 81 during my dissertation days, and then in analytics about 2012, 2013, you started to see quite a bit of commercial interest. So, over the past 12 or 13 years. And so knowledge management is still very important. I would have thought by now that we wouldn't be talking about KM. Organizations would just be doing it through osmosis. And but there are some interesting articles you might look at. This one is talking about some of the work in the public sector in terms of knowledge management. This was published last year. And then you also see, I know many of you are from local governments. There's been quite a bit of work looking at knowledge management, in state and local governments, and also for small and medium-sized enterprises. So the Vine Journal of Information Knowledge Management is it's a free electronic online journal. The previous article appeared in the KMRP Journal, the Knowledge Management Research and Practice Journal, which is also one of the leaders in the KM space. And certainly the Journal of Knowledge Management by Emerald Intelligence is the oldest journal. It's been around since about 1986. Okay, so with that as a backdrop, let me kind of talk about knowledge management and then describe some strategies, things for you to look at. I'll take you through a case study and then some lessons learned. So, so this is me a few years ago. I mentioned I'm a native Washingtonian, and I've always been interested in helping government here and abroad. This past year, I worked with the United Nations Population Fund in the Navy on knowledge management projects. And this picture was actually taken at the Fulbright Canada headquarters in Ottawa with some of their directors when I spent some time as a Fulbright visiting research chair in business and management at Queen's University in Kingston. So just to set the stage, you're probably experiencing, many of these different attributes shown on the screen here. So in terms of the graying workforce, I did a little bit of research, and it appears that about 35% of the federal government employees are 50 or older. The average age is about 47 now. I notice a number of you are from the New York City area. In the New York City government, the median age is 43. And according to the January 2024 BLS data, the median age of public administration employees varies from 42 for those in the justice, public order, and safety activities to almost age 49 and more general government and support. So, so certainly, over the years we've had the aging demographics, and that always leads to different cross-generational knowledge flow issues between the baby boomers and the veterans, the Gen X, the Gen Y, the Gen Zers. So I actually have done some work looking at cross-generational knowledge flows in the government and military. So anyway, pretty much you really had to do kind of more with less. And we also see the impact of social networking playing a great role, over the recent years. And so that's also an important part of knowledge management in terms of collaboration and sharing ideas and applying those types of knowledge and hopefully to create new knowledge.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, so we can look at organizations in terms of maybe desert types. I noticed there were a few folks from out west. And so we might have some organizations that might be called hot and dry. That is, that they're very active in applying knowledge management principles. So NASA, for example, the military, on the business side, 3M, which has a very strong continuous learning culture. Those would be examples of hot and dry organizations who have really embraced knowledge management over the years. State and local governments, from my experience, probably are within the semi-arid or maybe coastal range. And then you have some organizations, the cold organizations, that have no awareness of knowledge management and need perhaps some additional education. So I've been working in this field for many years. I published the first handbook on knowledge management going back to 1999. And so some years ago, we tried to put together a maturity capability model, if you will, for knowledge management running from 0 to 5. And my experience is that most organizations that I've seen are still at the maturity level of 2 or 3 in terms of actually applying knowledge management principles and getting the outcomes that they need that map very closely to their strategic plans and goals and objectives. So we have organizations, who are having still KM pilots and associated, initial metrics, and some of the organizational infrastructure has been built out. But, ultimately, you really want to reach kind of level 5, which would be like nirvana, where knowledge, you don't even talk about knowledge management. It's just interspersed throughout the organization. And in order to generate, new ways of doing things, and also building a stronger sense of community and belonging in the organization. So for me, knowledge management is kind of the integrative mechanism that cuts across these vertical silos that you have in many organizations and in the government, even at universities, we probably have the most silos. You have the programs and departments and schools, and then faculties, and how do you best cut across that? So through knowledge management, we'll just say KM, you want that ripple effect. You want to propagate knowledge across horizontally, across these different departments. And ultimately, you don't want to have this silo effect of being alone. you want to use knowledge management to kind of bust these silos. And so my feeling, and those in the community, the KM community, is that since we have, web-based technologies and the intranet and more emerging technologies like Gen AI, we could build the bridges across these isolated islands of knowledge. So this is actually a shot from Venice. Boy, I guess I've aged over the years. I'm looking at my hair, it's all brown, but wasn't that long ago. But anyway, so my mantra is that really knowledge management can help. And so let me kind of give you a little better introduction to the topic, because some people may not be as familiar with KM. Typically, we look at knowledge management in terms of three main areas, and the Venn diagram isn't really drawn to scale. It really should be 80% people kind of / culture and process, and 20% technology. So the people part is, how do you build and nurture a knowledge sharing culture? I was just speaking with a colleague in Bermuda with the government there, and there are signs of they're trying to promote more of a knowledge sharing culture, but like in many organizations, knowledge hoarding might exist for a number of reasons. I actually had dinner last night with the president of a local university, and she was saying that there's even kind of knowledge leaking that's happening at her university. So the cultural part is, how do you build and nurture this knowledge sharing environment? And that's where actually HR and OD and looking at your reward and recognition system play a key role. The second part is process. So how do you embed these knowledge management activities into your daily working lives? And because you all are busy, if this is something else I have to do on top of a full plate, it's not going to happen. So you have to be very thoughtful in how do you embed these KM processes in order to make your life easier. So we always say you want to work smarter, not harder. And then the other part is, of course, the technology. So you need to have, technology as an enabler in order to help with the flow of knowledge and the kinds of things you're trying to do. So we might say that, an organization is like a tree, and the roots would be your people, right? And if you want to nurture the tree, for it to grow and blossom and bear fruit, you have to nurture your people. And certainly the intellectual capital and intellectual assets in your organization. So there have been many studies that have looked at, is KM worthwhile? And this is one study from SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, and they found that those organizations that optimize knowledge management, are the leaders in their fields. And certainly, those that have been very proactive in this space have shown value from these knowledge management efforts. There have been other studies. The Delphi group, looked at why would you want to implement a knowledge management solution. And these were the key reasons that were cited. The K refers to knowledge. And, besides organizing corporate knowledge, you want to have new ways of sharing what's called tacit knowledge. So tacit knowledge is the knowledge you have in your head. And what you want to do is to make that into explicit knowledge so that it could be easily shared. And so the last bullet, the DM, just refers not to data mining, but to decision makers. So again, there has been a lot of interest and value shown to applying KM in organizations. Some of the government agencies have been applying knowledge management as part of their human capital strategy. I noticed we had someone from OPM. So in the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management is pretty much the owner of human capital and associated knowledge management. But so I think there's a 6-pillar model, but these are the 4 pillars that I think are most important when you're looking at building out a human capital strategy. And again, knowledge management feeds into succession planning, workforce development, your innovation activities, and now even this whole emerging field of digital transformation. So certainly you need what we're calling CN, competency management. So what are the competencies that we need or that you need in your workforce of the future? And then the PM is the performance management. How will I reward or provide disincentives for people, who either meet those competencies or perhaps, fall short? The KM deals with the knowledge management and leadership aspect. And what's also often omitted is the change management pillar. And that is, you need the right change management processes and change agents in place in order, to make a difference in this area. So maybe, you all will be the change agents after we have our discussion today. So you might be wondering, about, what's really involved in showing an effective knowledge sharing environment. So this was one paper that looked at the public sector in terms of the criteria for success regarding knowledge sharing. And these 6 points were the ones that were highlighted as being most important. And you could think about this in your own organization. Do you have an open leadership climate? Is there a capacity to learn from failure? So Hannah mentioned that I was the first knowledge management officer at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, which is outside of Washington, D.C. There are 10 NASA centers. And I wanted to have a failure award. And people looked at me, who would want to have an award for failing? Who would want to receive that? But the focus was really on trying to recognize kind of the bittersweet stories so that people don't reinvent the wheel and go down the wrong path. So I wanted to reward or recognize people for sharing those stories so others could learn from that. So at the time, I think it was called, as a euphemism, a significant learning award as opposed to a failure award, which is probably politically more correct. And then, certainly the need for having the good information quality and, satisfaction with the change processes and performance orientation and a vision for change. So you could think about, your organization, and do you have some of these key characteristics? I've also been involved with some of my students looking at, different studies. This was one done where we reached out to 42 government and not-for-profit organizations to see what they were doing in terms of a formal knowledge retention strategy. And about 80% at the time said they didn't have a formal knowledge retention strategy. The good news, though, was that, about a third of those at least had a backup expert in their knowledge area that might be at risk. So that was encouraging. But not organizations have that, right? Particularly, you could be very thin. I'm actually doing work. I'll take you through a U.S. Navy case study that I've been involved in and continue to be. And, every month there are some key experts who are leaving, and exit interviews from the research, even 2 or 3 months out, they're not effective. So you really need to have some type of knowledge retention process in place. And I argue from even day one of the employee's lifespan with the organization. But anyway, we can get into that later. So that was on the government not-for-profit side. I wanted to see on the corporate side what's been happening. And the Institute for Corporate Productivity over the years, they were based in Tampa, now they're in Scottsdale. They've done a number of studies and they surveyed about 430 organizations. And they found that also over 77% of the organizations didn't have an owner for knowledge retention initiatives and were falling short in that area. So when we talk about knowledge management, what do we mean? There are two main approaches that are used, and one of them will typically take dominance over the other. So there might be an 80-20 type rule, so depending upon the culture of your organization, you might be favoring one approach over the other. Okay, so what are those approaches? So the connection approach is what we call personalization, and there are different knowledge management techniques that come out of HR or OD or even the IT world or education or sociology. That's the beauty with knowledge management. It's really a multidisciplinary field. So things like mentoring programs or even reverse mentoring, right? So I'm a baby boomer. I could still learn a lot from my students, on the technology end for sure. And so mentoring or reverse mentoring programs is a nice way of sharing knowledge and transferring knowledge. Job shadowing or job rotation or lunch and learns. At NASA, we had creative learning groups that were facilitated by a master coach to, again, develop a closer sense of community in certain areas. Desk side reviews, maybe using expertise locators. So, for example, it would be interesting to know in your organization, if you're trying to reach out to someone with a certain skill set, maybe for your own knowledge or perhaps developing a good project team with multiple skill sets, do you have an expertise locator system that typically would feed out of probably your ERP system that would indicate, people with certain skill sets who might be even available during a certain time to work on your project. And you could bring in things like, special hobbies, perhaps, or areas of interest to build that community. And then certainly, on the social media side, through, blogs or, Twitter, whatever, you can facilitate that connection and collaboration. So that's one approach. The other school of thought is what we call the codification or collection approach. These are more systems-oriented approaches. And so at NASA, for example, most of the folks at NASA, I don't know if we have anyone on from NASA, but they're typically scientists, technologists, engineers, and at least in my experience, seem to favor more of a codification approach. And so these might be lessons learned systems. It might be lab notebooks, maybe searchable multimedia, asset management systems, continuity books. So when someone leaves the organization, you put together a continuity book. It comes out of the military on what are the key questions that the new person will need to ask, and then how will those questions be answered? What are some of the key sources, the key processes, whatever. After action reviews is another form of a collection approach. Again, out of the military, what went right, what went wrong, how can we make sure we do things correctly, the next time. And then certainly the most popular type of KM application is the use of online communities, or what's called COPs, communities of practice, or communities of interest. Daimler Chrysler had tech clubs, but essentially these were communities of practice. And then you could also have experts giving webinars and webcasts on do's and don'ts. And we did that at NASA quite well. So I'll just show you a few examples of KM applications, and I'll take you through a case study and then some lessons learned. So this was borrowed from kind of the World Bank. The World Bank created these knowledge fairs, and this was to get people together. It could be posters, could be small groups, to exchange ideas across different, areas and disciplines. So ICT-KM is the information knowledge technology knowledge management groups that this was part of what's called CGIAR, so one of the agricultural research centers. There were 15 of them. This was one in Rome, and they had what they called a share fair to, again, try to exchange, and these were mostly in person, different views, and share ideas in order to learn what others are doing, and maybe collaborate and generate, new opportunities to create perhaps, new ways of doing things, or new types of services or processes. Certainly you're aware, there have been many virtual or online communities, particularly over the COVID times. The National Library of Medicine had been very active with a virtual health library, building out these communities in the health area. NASA, also, as I have mentioned, has had for many years a lessons learned information system. This is the most recent view of it. It's part of their NASA engineering network. And again, there might be different lessons that deal with systems engineering, project management, leadership issues. And, a lesson learned is not just a failure, could be a success. So when I was at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, I was actually in charge of our lessons learned contribution that fed into the agency-wide system. And the only downside with lessons learned systems is that from the research, about 70% of them rely more on passive dissemination of lessons versus active, kind of proactive dissemination and analysis. So it's the push versus pull phenomenon. So, if I'm working on something now, I'd like to get a lesson that would help me, what I'm working on now. So, being very dynamic. So actually you can use AI through intelligent agents. We were starting to do this to kind of see, here's someone's profile of interest. And as a new lesson was entered into the system, we could push that lesson out to the individual so they could learn kind of just in time, as opposed to getting a lesson 6 months ago that you probably wouldn't remember that you received. And then we also had a number of case studies and different vignettes. I think someone couldn't attend an early morning session, so they asked me to fill in as the knowledge management officer at NASA Goddard, and I talked about how to avoid being a political football. And so again, we had different experts, and if you go to the APPEL NASA site, which is shown here, you'll be able to pull up different case studies and lessons learned and knowledge sharing tools. It's a great resource. And so, I would encourage you to look at that. NASA used more of a federated approach. So there was an overarching and agency-wide knowledge, a chief knowledge officer, and then each NASA center has its own culture. And so they had their own knowledge management officer or chief knowledge officer, but again, it was more of a federated model in order to adapt to the different cultures, whether it's Kennedy Space Center or Johnson or Ames or Goddard or wherever. Okay, so I'm watching the clock. I'll try to wrap this up in 15 or 20 minutes. So what are some of the first things you can do when you're interested in building out a knowledge management strategy? Well, you have to know, what are the kinds of knowledge sharing practices that exist? What knowledge resources are available? You have to conduct what's called in the literature a knowledge audit. People don't like to be audited, so you can call it a knowledge assessment and sharing, survey. And I actually have posted an instrument that I have developed over the years, and Hannah, you can feel free, to post that or distribute it after the session. And that might be of interest to you. It's a little lengthy, really good questionnaires should take no more than 20 minutes, but anyway, you could take a look at it and maybe customize it for your purposes. But again, it looks at, what are the different types of knowledge sharing practices that are going on, and who are some of the key individuals who have that type of knowledge. And you could even use, as shown in the last bullet, there's something called social or organizational network analysis that will allow you to map. It just uses graph theory or link analysis, and it will map the knowledge flows and knowledge gaps in the organization. And so that might help you even re-engineer some of those workflows in order to improve, what you're trying to accomplish. So, certainly there's key knowledge in the organization, and knowledge is an asset, so it has to be secured and safeguarded. But, these are the kinds of questions that you might be thinking about. So, in the organization, where are you most vulnerable in maintaining your performance levels and strategically important competencies? Who are the individuals who possess this knowledge? Are there backup experts in place? What are the succession planning and workforce development processes? And then, what kinds of collection and connection approaches might be used? So when you look at this whole area of knowledge retention, there are a number of elements that deal with, not only the technology side, but more important, it's the human capital, it's the people, the culture, the process side. So, looking at your reward and recognition system, how do you encourage people to share what they know, right? I might be an expert for 40 years, develop, my expertise. I might want to keep that competitive edge, right? So, what are ways and incentives to encourage people to share their knowledge? And we could talk about that later. So there's several, elements that are important. I wanted to show you just two organizations to give you a feeling for some of the knowledge management metrics that could be used. So I'm actually working with the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Carter Rock outside of Washington now, helping them on a grant develop knowledge management metrics. And they fall typically under system output and outcome measures. So this is MITRE. MITRE is kind of like a quasi-government group, and they do some great work. And you could see, if you look at the system measures under examples, you see, like, what are the number of views or visits per month, the number of communities. That's okay. Might be better to know the number of active contributors, right, instead of lurkers. And so you can have different output measures. Some might be anecdotal, as shown here, but what you really want are the outcome measures, right? How do your KM initiatives align with your strategic goals and objectives? So, whether it's through developing new ways of innovating, whether it's maybe influencing, I'll show you, for example, in the health area, maybe by pushing knowledge out to HIV, AIDS mothers, it might change some of their behaviors. So again, you really want to look at outcome measures. And IBM, through their Global Business Solutions Group, they put together this quadrant. And essentially, you want to move from the left side, the knowledge sharing quadrant, up to the upper right on productivity, right? So you want to look for, does the KM or knowledge sharing allow you to accelerate your decision-making in terms of efficiency and effectiveness? Does it increase opportunities for innovation? Does it reduce the learning time to perform activities? So again, this is an area that's a difficult area, because when you think of knowledge management, it's often kind of a longer term focus. And so some people say, it might be hard to quantify and develop a return on investment, although you can use knowledge valuation approaches. Anyway, we can get into that if you want. But some people say it's really more of a return on vision. So, there's some interesting things that you can look at. I did one project with Johns Hopkins, in the Knowledge for Health. They've done some great work. You can check their website, now called Success, but you can look for the K4H Knowledge for Health. And again, these are the types of outcomes you hope to achieve. Are the health systems strengthened? Are you changing behaviors of mothers who might have HIV, AIDS, and are there new innovations? Are you improving trends in disease mortality, morbidity, etc.? Okay, I promised you a quick case study. We probably need a couple hours ahead of, for all what I'd like to share, but I'll try to finish in about 10 or 12 minutes. So this is a case study that we presented at the Knowledge Management World Conference last year. And so it's already been approved, for distribution. So, and as I mentioned, I continue to work with the Naval Surface Warfare Center at Carter-Rock. So their tagline is "The America's Fleet Starts Here." So they're in charge of submarine and ship design. And what happened is that there was, there have been many experts who were retiring, and there was a need over time to develop kind of an enterprise-wide knowledge management system. So one of the first things you want to do is to align your knowledge management strategy with your organization's strategic plan. Now, the good thing was that at Carter-Rock, if you looked at their strategic plan, the most current one is shown here, going out to 2024, you could see in quotes the different aspects of a knowledge management flavor that tied into their strategic framework. So the capture and transfer of ship and submarine design knowledge and practices, innovation, infrastructure, workforce development, the digital strategy to leverage, and these are direct quotes, to leverage, knowledge management, sharing, and problem swarming, and to foster knowledge stewardship. So that was a good thing already. So there was some recognition of the importance of developing a knowledge management enterprise-wide strategy. This wasn't so new. The Department of Navy, the CIO's office, even going back to 2005, had developed the KM strategy. And then in 2014, they published an updated version. And then more recently, a colleague of mine, Mark Nissen at the Naval Postgraduate School, had done work also in developing formal knowledge management processes for part of the Navy, personnel area for the Chief of Naval Operations. So there had been work that had already been developed that could be borrowed or adapted. So the overarching KM philosophy was kind of like the NASA approach, kind of the federal or federated approach. And there were different teams and branches and departments, and then you have the division, and there was a need to integrate knowledge across these different groups. And so we, along with the knowledge management working group, which made up of representatives across the different groups, as well as some selected others from HR, from IT, the library, public relations, etc., built out a KM strategy. And shown here are the three main goals, to foster effective knowledge development and transfer between individuals and departments, to use KM to improve agility and enhance innovation. And then the third goal was to improve the resource development to meet the current and future mission. And what you see in reddish orange is we had a separate department heads meeting, and we asked them, what would be kind of your knowledge management utopia? And they indicated these three things, which then tied in very nicely with the development of these goals. So once you have a strategy, you have to understand what are the key pillars of that strategy or framework, and then you build out an implementation roadmap. So these were the main pillars that you often see. So there's a leadership pillar, deals with governance, there's a culture, a policy, processes, and technology. And so I'll just look very quickly at each of these, and you'll have the slides. So, if you have questions afterwards, even after we sign off, feel free to shoot me an email, because I know I'm going through this pretty quickly. But essentially, we had a KM senior champion, the chief of staff with the commanding officer. We appointed a chief knowledge officer. We were able to stand up a KM working group, and then to also appoint knowledge stewards within the different departments within the division. And so on the cultural side, as I've mentioned before, it's very important to look at your recognition and reward system in your different knowledge sharing proficiencies, to encourage people to share what they know. Most people will share for altruistic reasons, like giving back to the organization. I saw this at NASA all the time. You just felt so good being a part of the organization. As you age, you wanted to mentor others and, give back to the organization that way. And, you really wanted to look at a number of the innovation skill sets. So actually an innovation lab was stood up as well to help foster the exchange of knowledge through knowledge management and also digital transformation, to help develop and nurture a knowledge sharing culture. On the processes side, we've talked about the importance of developing a knowledge retention and transfer SOP, standard operating procedure. And in the Navy, there's been a big push for digital transformation. And so KM fits very nicely within that space, along with some of the other techniques you might use as shown here. On the policy side, of course, you have to have not only the senior champions, but make sure you have the funding necessary to help build out your KM activities. And You could do a number of things, whether it's through lessons learned or best practices, or, certainly you want to have evaluations to see how well your KM efforts have fared. And then, of course, you have technology considerations as well, because you need to have the technology infrastructure to support your KM activities. So, knowledge retention kind of fits into this. And, some organizations have what are called organizational amnesia. And my feeling is that, as I mentioned before, it's important to capture knowledge as individuals go through the their tenure in the organization, and there even are tools like CMAP, which was developed, it's public domain, it was funded by the Navy, developed at the University of West Florida, to help you even map critical knowledge before your subject matter experts lead. So a few key lessons, and then Hannah, I'm going to wrap up in 5 minutes. We'll have about 25 minutes for Q&A. So you want to make sure that your KM strategy is aligned with your strategic plan for the organization. And that will help you when you're developing your metrics to determine the success of your KM initiatives. You also want to make sure that your KM activities fit the culture of your organization. So whether you err, on being more on the personalization approach or the codification approach, make sure you look at outcome measures, which are so important, and that you have the buy-in from your senior leaders. These are a few favorites of mine. If you're interested in learning more about the area. And if you want to think about, what are some different types of knowledge sharing proficiencies or competencies, these are some that we were kicking around, that perhaps you could be evaluated on. I remember at NASA, in order to get merit pay for 1 year, it was based on your knowledge sharing capabilities, and you had to show value from that. So, there's some interesting ideas that you might insert here as part of your recognition reward systems. So just a couple lessons learned, and then we'll stop. Again, we talked about the importance of aligning your KM strategy with your enterprise-wide strategy, your strategic plan, goals and objectives. Don't do everything at once. Try a pilot, see what works, have associated metrics. And you probably want to tie your KM to your core competencies. There will be skeptics, and my recommendation is to work with those who understand the benefits of knowledge sharing, and then those who are more skeptics, if they see value in what was being done, they might come on board as advocates. And don't force fit the technology to the problem, right? So just be careful of that. So these are a few of my knowledge sharing tenets. I think we've probably talked about most of these. If you're interested on how to bring in analytics into the space, some articles that I've been involved in, and this was published in Informs Analytics. There's some books that might be of interest to you, particularly those in the government space. And then lastly, I've been involved with some book series that might also be worthwhile. So I think with that, I'm going to stop. I'll end with this quote. This was on a storefront in New York City. It says that you can find inspiration in everything. And then if you can't, look again. So make sure you have that passion. Again, I thank you for your attendance and open the floor to any questions or comments. So Hannah, it's all yours, and I can stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Jay. And I'm just going to take us off record.